Hope you're all comfortable. You have your tea on your coffee because we have an intense afternoon and hour and a half to talk about the biggest game in town, the EU Deforestation Regulation. So, very officially, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and practitioners from near and far. On behalf of Fern, a forest and rights NGO with 30 years experience, I welcome you to our event. Today we will explore which changes the EU Deforestation Regulation, while not even in application, has already triggered on the ground. My name is Nicole Polsterer. I'm a sustainable consumption and production campaigner, and I have followed the EU Deforestation Regulation for the past 10 years. I'm working with partners in Brazil and lately also in China. We are very honored to present this stellar panel to you, with whom we will explore over the next 1 hour and a half what kind of changes the EUDR has triggered, ranging from transparency to institutional coordination and legal assessments, from Asia to Africa to Latin America, and in sectors such as coffee, beef, leather, and many more. So, while most of our speakers will be with us until the end of the webinar, unfortunately, Olivier will have to leave us a little earlier. So please be sure to address questions to him early on in the Q&A window. We will open the Q&A window after Michaela's presentation, and it will stay on until the end. Our panelists are encouraged to answer questions in writing throughout the webinar if there is time. And then towards the end, we will also have a moderated discussion for about half an hour. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first expert, Dr. Michaela Foster from the European Forest Institute, EFI. Michaela provides technical and policy support to governments and supply chain actors to strengthen agricultural value chains and reduce deforestation. Her work includes supporting multi-stakeholder collaboration on sustainable land use and trade, with a focus on the cocoa sector in Ghana and Liberia. Today, she will give us an overview of changes EFI has observed, and I think accompanied in most cases, in 5 supply chains in 8 countries. Michaela, the floor is yours to give us a broad overview of changes observed. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, hi to everyone online, and thanks so much, Nicole and the team at Fern, for this opportunity to share the findings from our recent assessment. EUDR really has been central to a lot of the work that we do in supporting our partner countries in their efforts to promote sustainable value chains and to reduce deforestation. And with this study, we wanted to document some of the examples of how the EUDR is already driving institutional, policy, and technical changes in some of the countries that we work in. We can move to the next slide. And I'll start with our main finding, and that's that we're seeing a flurry of actions by governments, private sector, operators, and other stakeholders to strengthen supply chain sustainability and governance. EUDR preparedness efforts have led to multi-stakeholder engagement, institutional mobilization, and technical developments, all in support of facilitating compliance with EUDR requirements. I'm going to present 5 main responses to the EUDR that we've seen, which are drawn from 8 case studies across 5 sectors in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And this comes with the caveat that these are contexts in which EFI is actively engaged in. So findings may not always be generalizable across all contexts, and there might be some responses that aren't covered here. Next slide. So the first response, we're seeing that the EUDR has triggered institutional mobilization on deforestation-free and legal supply chains, both through new interinstitutional EUDR response bodies. That's like the Thailand High-Level Interministerial Committee and those other examples that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. In other countries, like in Cameroon, discussions on the EUDR and EUDR related issues are happening through existing sector platforms. Across all of our case studies, bilateral technical exchanges on deforestation-free supply chains took place with the EU, as well as awareness raising events that included a broad range of stakeholders. And there are two interesting things that I want to point out here. The first is that engagement hasn't been commodity specific. We've seen cross-commodity, cross-sector dialogue and coordination on sustainability, which in some of these contexts is relatively new. And second, while there has been some political opposition to the EUDR that has been expressed, that hasn't stopped the institutional mobilization that we've seen or technical progress to move forward, especially de- in support of helping domestic actors to maintain access to the EU market. Now on to our second response on the next slide. These are focused on technical systems, and we've seen countries reviewing and aligning their national traceability and forest monitoring systems. So most countries aren't starting from scratch. They're building on existing infrastructure. These are things like farmer registries, traceability systems, and they're adapting them to meet EUDR requirements. So an example of this is, for instance, the expansion of the timber legality system in Indonesia to go all the way to the plot level. That's SVLK plus now. We're also seeing technical exchanges and dry runs involving the EU and other actors, as well as engagement on forest data. So that's including engagements with the Joint Research Center. And in some cases, like in Ghana, there is the development of new forest data aligned with EUDR requirements, such as 2020 forest maps using the FAO definition. Now, moving on to the next slide. Third response we've seen are efforts to build clarity on what is legal production, and that's happening through legality assessments. These have been supported both by EU-funded technical assistance as well as the private sector working together, coordinating to get these assessments done. These assessments have provided really practical information for compliance, like what are the relevant legislations related to commodity production and trade in a specific country. They provided recommendations for due diligence, but they've also been quite valuable in raising various challenges associated with legality to the top of the agenda. We can think of things like the issue of production in protected areas where it's sometimes prohibited, depending on the context, or other legal inconsistencies or enforcement gaps. These studies have been and can continue to be quite useful inputs into policy and reform discussions in those countries. And you can actually find out more about these assessments, especially those that, or in particular, those that EFI has supported at our website, legalitynavigator.efi.int, where we share those assessments as well as a methodology for conducting an inclusive process in a country. Now, moving on to the private sector, we're seeing companies mobilizing resources to support compliance, particularly those larger companies and those focused on the EU. This includes strengthening internal traceability systems, getting geolocation information, as well as using third-party solutions, for instance, for geospatial analysis, data verification. So we're seeing also a bit of an ecosystem of actors also developing in support of compliance. Some of these efforts are covering all markets, while others are really targeted to only EU-bound supply chains. Across the sector, across private sector, overall preparedness seems to be relatively uneven. Smaller firms are facing capacity constraints, and sector-wide coordination is relatively limited, except in a case where strong associations exist, like Colombia's National Coffee Federation, who's been quite active in adjusting tools, expanding geolocation and traceability coverage across the sector. But in general, responses are relatively fragmented and on a company by company basis. Although we are seeing active participation in sector dialogues, in test runs or dry runs, as well as engagement on data exchanges with national systems. And now to our fifth and final response. This one relates to one of the biggest concerns that's often raised when talking about the EUDR, and that's the exclusion of smallholders. So a lot of efforts have been placed on the upstream segments of the supply chain. This includes filling gaps around farm mapping, trader formalization, and capacity building. And while these efforts will certainly help to keep actors in the supply chain, it's also important to remember that exclusion risks remain. But from our evidence, it seems that they seem to be rather localized. And so targeted support can really help here to further minimize those exclusion risks where they are. And I want to end by highlighting three cross-cutting enablers on the next slide. So first, sector structure. Sectors that are more coordinated with strong sector institutions have been able to move really quickly and at a greater scale. And this is both institutions like government institutions like the Ghana Cocoa Board, as well as private ones like producer associations like the Coffee Federation in Colombia. Second, civil society, they are playing a really key role as intermediaries between producers, downstream actors, as well as government. They're often representing the voices of farmers, of producers in dialogues and technical exchanges. But it's important to note here that CSO mobilization hasn't yet reached the level that we've seen in past initiatives, like with flag VPAs. And support needs to sort of mobilize and sustain their participation have been raised quite a lot already. And third, development partners. So that includes the EU and member states, for instance, through the Team Europe initiative on deforestation-free value chains. Development partners have been really key enablers through financing as well as in providing technical assistance on a number of different initiatives, many of those examples provided on the earlier slides. And this support seems quite impactful when it is aligned with national strategies and also when there's institutional capacity and willingness. And I'll end here just by summing up that early evidence is showing that EUDR is really bringing to the forefront deforestation and legality risk. Certainly, there will be implementation challenges that need to be addressed, but overall, our findings are quite positive that the EUDR is already motivating quite a lot of engagement and action towards deforestation-free value chains. If you want to know more about our study, because I know this was a very quick overview, um, our report will be shared on our website, efi.int, as well as on the TEI for Deforestation Free Value Chains Hub website. And you can always contact me if you have any questions about our report. Thank you, and looking forward to any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Michaela, for this whirlwind tour through through the initiatives. It's great to see the role institutions are playing and how important it is to strengthen processes, institutions, but also sustain civil society participation on this issue. And good to point out to gaps, such as how to get smaller companies and smallholders ready to keep the EU market or access the EU market. And our next speaker is Olivier Snowden-Laboulle, Global Head of Coffee Sustainability and Social Impact. So this is a supply chain where there are a lot of smallholders. So let's see what he has to say. Olivier oversees the coffee platform, the sustainability strategy, which helps to raise the output of responsibly sourced coffee and supporting farmers through the Stronger Coffee initiative. Olivier also leads the efforts in the areas of human rights due diligence across all commodities for the company. He will now take us on a journey in the coffee sector and the systemic changes he has seen in the countries most concerned with the EU Deforestation Regulation. And before I hand over the mic, so to say, just a reminder that the Q&A window will open now. You can field your questions to Michaela, Olivier, and all panelists as from now on in the Q&A window, which Tiziano will open in the back end. So if there's a technical issue and you've raised your hand, Tiziano will reach out to you. But for questions in the meantime, please do use the Q&A window. And Olivier, I hope your situation at the airport is still okay, and you can go ahead and give the presentation. Over to you.
Should be good. Thank you very much, Nicole. Just yesterday, I shared that with Nicole. I read on Reuters the headline, Europe's incoming forest law is already spurring positive change. And so I thought it was very topical, and this is, in a sense, the point of my presentation. What I will do is I will zoom in on some of the aspects that Michaela mentioned under point 4, what the private sector is seeing now. So if we could go to the next slide, you can see that the coffee sector has been prioritizing deforestation as one of its top priorities for many, many years. As far as I can look back on the Sustainable Coffee Challenge report of the various commitments, forest conservation, deforestation has always been at the top. But it doesn't mean that because many companies for a very long time have had voluntary commitments, there was not room for improvement. And I think EUDR has provided a sort of catalyst moment for everyone and has accelerated a lot of processes that would have otherwise probably been taking place, but over a longer period of time. And so I want to give you 5 reasons why I believe that this positive change from EUDR has already taken place and will probably stay, even though EUDR has not yet entered into application. Next slide, please. The first one is the Brussels effect. This is something that people in the EU bubble are familiar with. It's the concept that because the EU is such a large market, you will basically have any regulation that will start applying as a standard to the entire world, although people would not be bound in Thailand or in Indonesia by an EU law, but just because it's more efficient or cheaper to do it this way. And so what I want to show you on this graph here is how when we have 100 bags of global supply of coffee in the world, there are only 30 that technically need to be imported into the EU. So in theory, you would say the supply of EUDR coffee should be 30%. But actually, what happens is that you have a roaster in the UK, for example, as 80% of their coffee goes to the UK, for which no EUDR is required, but 20 or maybe 30% has to go to the EU. And from a purely logistical, technical point of view, starting to do 2 different lines, managing logistics for 2 different products becomes very, very difficult. So many just choose to go all in on EUDR coffee rather than to segregate and to have 2 production lines. Then we need a production capacity buffer. As traders, we can't just have the exact amount of supply required to meet the demand. There's always some loss, there's some delays, there's some quality issues, there's a bad harvest one day. And so you need to add another probably 20% capacity buffer here to be able to meet this hard demand. And so ultimately, while the EU market only represents about 30% of global coffee import, we need a supply of 65% of the world coffee crop to be EUDR compliant in order to be able to meet this demand. And my guess is that, ultimately more and more will join, and who knows, perhaps, one day the whole coffee production will be EUDR compliant. My second point is about the fact that EUDR has created a new standard for certification. Before, when we checked deforestation under the standard that we just went and basically asked the farmer, did you deforest after the cutoff date? And the farmer said no, and we wrote no, and we were compliant. Today, because of EUDR, most certification standards have upgraded their deforestation assessment, and the practice from the past is no longer valid. And so now we have mandatory plot level geolocation from D1 for EUDR, we have 100% plot level verification, which before was done more through audit on a sample basis. And we have satellite-based deforestation risk assessment. So no longer asking the farmer, did you deforest or not? I personally really struggle to believe that even if EUDR was not to come into application or be further delayed, any of these certification would go back to the old way. Because in a sense, they've proven that a higher standard is possible that everybody is implementing right now. And so I believe that these changes will stay for the future, no matter what. Third point is that EUDR also created, just a quick example of what I mean by these in-depth deforestation assessments. So before, again, we were just visiting the farmer asking, did you deforest? Yes, no. And now we have this type of imagery where we can show, a potential deforestation event to the left, to the right. And on the next slide, you can see we send our staff to take geolocated picture of the farm itself on the patch that was potentially deforested to further provide evidence as to whether or not a plot is compliant. My third point is about another indirect product that EUDR created. I don't know if you're familiar with carbon accounting, but land use change, specifically deforestation, represents the bulk of emissions for a lot of crops, especially coffee. Here you see an example. 60% of the emissions related to Arabica production in Honduras come from land use change. And with EUDR, giving a certainty that there has been no deforestation in the last 5 years allows companies to discount their Scope 3 emissions by 25%. And as a result, I have seen American-based roasters with zero business in the EU calling me and asking about this EUDR product because as part of their non-deforestation commitment, it is a very reliable product that they can basically use. The premium is manageable if you think about the fact that it's less than 1% of the price of the commodity. And so even US-based roasters with zero sales in the EU were asking about EUDR coffee as a non-deforested, low-carbon coffee and a way to progress on their deforestation commitment. Fourth point, next slide, please. It's the fact that EUDR has created a technological ecosystem that enables the assessment of deforestation like nothing before. It is now easier and cheaper to do deforestation assessment at plot level than ever before. I don't know you, but I get about 2 messages a week from new startups claiming to have, the silver bullet to EUDR compliance, which of course is usually more complicated than that. But even since I made these slides about 3 days ago, I've received 2 more contacts on LinkedIn of companies I didn't know and whose logo is not here today. And finally, on the next slide, what I see is also that EUDR was a wake-up call for the coffee sector, where we've realized that if we don't tackle this issue ourselves as a sector, we will be forced to do things that we find to be, and I apologize, Antoine, but the nature of the regulation is a little bit burdensome on the paperwork that is required from company. And so this has spurred some initiatives that are now trying to tackle deforestation at a much more higher level, at country level, for example, and brought people together that before would have tried that in their own corner. And the reason why the industry is doing this as well is because we want to avoid the emergence of a dual market. What we don't want, and an unintended consequence, the opposite of the Brussels effect, would be that we have one clean market for the EU, but another dirty one for the rest of the world. And of course, we don't want that to happen. And that's the reason why I'm at the airport today. The press release is under embargo, but tomorrow we'll be launching an initiative specific for a world region for coffee. You'll hear about this. And so we'll be able to tackle this issue here. So in summary, I would say that EUDR might survive its own death, even if it never entered into application. It's already massively changed the sector for the better. Thank you, Nicole.
Yes, and thank you very much, Olivier, to you. As we say in German, the ones believe dead live longer. And I hope this is also the case with the EUDR. I think it's no secret that we are all expecting to see in the next 2 weeks the changes to FAQ and the product scope, and Antoine will speak about this later. And that we, most of us hope that this is the last reiteration and that we go into application at the end of the year. as stressed by the European Commission in several meetings in the past few weeks. But yeah, thanks again, Olivier. I find the numbers quite striking of the Brussels effect. So for 30% of produce needed for the EU market, actually 65 need to be compliant. So we have a double effect at least. I also find it striking that there's this product around low emissions coffee, so to say. And I see that with also looking towards China. I see China asking in other markets whether, for instance, there is low emission and hence low deforestation beef. So I think this is definitely a product that one of the biggest market in the world is looking at. So I think what the EUDR has spurred is very encouraging and also marketable. We have not been able to discuss the other challenge in this sector, which is legality, and I hope we can discuss it at some other point. But now we're moving on to our next speaker. We are staying in Europe. We are going to Spain. Our next speaker is Marta Angoloti, head of the forestry unit in the Directorate General for Biodiversity, Forests and Desertification, working with the Ministry of Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. She is responsible for the implementation of the EU timber and FLEGT regulations and the EUDR, EU Deforestation Regulation, EUDR. Marta and her team in Spain have been leading the efforts among ministries and competent authorities across Europe to build a shared understanding of the EUDR. And we are happy to learn today of where we are at with preparing for implementation and harmonizing preparations for the enforcement next year. Harmonizing preparations, creating a shared understanding is often mentioned in this debate. And yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from Marta on what's happening on this front. Marta, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Nicole and Fern for organizing this webinar. As presented by Nicole, I am head of the unit, which has been appointed as a national competent authority for EUDR implementation in Spain, together with our regional administration. It is an honor for us to take part on this positive panel and share with you all of our work and perspective as competent authority. Well, as already said by Nicole, this event comes in a very timely moment when the Commission is set to present their report and the simplification package. These measures, alongside with the legislative reforms approved at the end of last year, should enable companies and producer countries to be better prepared for EUDR and also for operators in our member states. It is also useful to exchange on how we can implement the regulation by December 2027 in the most effective way. Obviously, I will focus on our role as competent authorities in trying to ensure the successful implementation of EUDR. Spain has been fully committed since the very beginning to advancing the effective implementation of EUDR. On this respect, I would like to stress that coordination and cooperation at EU level is a necessary condition to ensure that the regulation is fully implemented and in an effective and harmonized way, as many companies and many sectors have raised many times. Consequently, coordination across the EU has been one of the most important priorities for us. To this end, in 2023, Spain led the creation of an informal technical group at EU level. This group operates under the guidance of the European Commission and actively involves representatives from various ministries and departments from the member states, many of whom have practical experience in implementing regulations such as the EU timber regulation, the custom regulation, as well as knowledge of all the regulated sectors. The work carried out by this informal working group has been crucial in ensuring a common understanding of the regulation. With this goal, since the entering into force of the EUDR, many member states have played a relevant role under the Commission leadership in preparing the FAQs and the guidance document, for example, but also in the technical decision regarding the information system. Therefore, even if those documents are not legally binding, the FAQs and the guidance documents are fundamental because they represent a consensual interpretation of the member state and the Commission on the regulation, ensuring an aligned and consistent implementation in those areas that are not fully addressed in the core text. Likewise, coordinated implementation at national level is also critical. For this reason, we have also actively working to establish an effective governance framework in the implementation of the EUDR in Spain, which includes regional competent authorities and other relevant public administrations, such as agricultural, trade, custom, and the environmental police. In Spain, the cornerstone of this architecture is the future National Act on the EUDR implementation. This future act will define the framework for penalties applicable to EUDR infringements, but also and mainly aim at establishing the legal governance for coordination and cooperation between the different administrations involved in the EUDR implementation. However, collaboration with the private sector and the partner countries is also crucial in order to ensure a smooth implementation. We have been involved in several initiatives like 2 dry runs organized by EFI dedicated to palm oil and has joined the newly EFI-led community of practice that was launched several weeks ago. Spain holds high expectation on this initiative that will enable the necessary collaboration with NGOs and the private sector together with a view to find workable solutions for operational problems that may arise in the implementation of the regulation. Regarding the dialogue with third countries, which is also quite relevant for us, this, as you know, has been supported by Article 30 of EUDR. And on that framework, we have joined the Team Europe initiative on deforestation value chain, led by the German cooperation and DG INTA from the Commission, that provides a coordinated policy support to partner countries and helps to strengthen enforcement and governance. And in particular, Spain, we have been participating as competent authorities in All Invest Verde program. And we are also in other relevant platforms on sustainable value chains, like the FACT Dialogue and the Amsterdam Declaration partnerships. Within this framework, I would like to emphasize an aspect that we consider essential, that the previous speaker has already raised, that the dialogue with producers and governments in producing countries is essential. This dialogue has provided us with a first-hand knowledge on how these countries are evolving and how the tools are developing and or strengthening the support for compliance within the EUDR. We observe also growing interest in using the EUDR as a catalyst for improving environmental governance, digitalization, and enforcement of environmental legislation. Countries such as Ecuador and Colombia are clear examples of this approach. In Ecuador, the GIA system makes it possible to identify and trace all segments of the supply chains, creating effective and transparent information flows that can be transmitted to European operators. Colombia is progressing through a comprehensive system of data identification and processing. Similarly, countries such as Brazil and Argentina are investing in strengthening their internal capabilities through domestic tools. Brazil has developed Selo Verde in many states, while Argentina continues to expand the functionalities of BISEC platform. Other countries, such as Uruguay and Peru, are developing and adapting their own integrated system along the same files. And finally, as we will hear from Paraguay, from Dr. Ginés, many progress has been made by other countries, even if not mentioned here. Even if we see as competent authorities that these tools are not green lines, when developed to display the underlying data transparently, these tools enable European operators to use that information within their own due diligence system and to reach their own documented conclusion, which is their obligation under the EUDR. So we understand that all this system will be quite useful to support their compliance under the EUDR. And for that, it is also essential that competent authorities in the European Union, we understand how these tools work to ensure that they deliver real value for our own operators and that they do not generate unrealistic expectation that they cannot guarantee. With that in mind, we have visited some of the countries, the ones that we have mentioned, and we have worked with those government and local actors to try to share a common understanding on what the EUDR requires. This dialogue is helping to ensure that the tools are being developed in producing countries in a way that they are aligned with the principle and the operational needs of effective implementation of the regulation. And finally, even if this message was already said before, I wanted to share that we have seen a lot of impactful results. As they have shared before, we see that the EUDR is already transforming global supply chains in many countries. And it is also encouraging the development of forest-friendly practices around the world. This is a milestone whose results are already evident. And even if we also understand that EUDR still poses many challenges, not only for producing countries, but for operators and also for competent authorities, challenges that need to be solved, we hope that we will continue to move forward this complete implementation, always taking in mind that, as I said before, a coordinated and effective implementation needs to be founded in dialogue, communication, and a common understanding on the legal text. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Marta, for giving us an overview of what's happening within Spain, in Europe on the enforcement side, but also what you have observed in Latin America in different countries and how you're participating in Al Invest. And this is a nice bridge to Dr. Andrés Ginés in Paraguay indeed. So our next expert is Dr. Andrés Ginés, who has been leading the executive unit for social and environmental traceability and is reporting directly to the Minister of Industry and Commerce in Paraguay. Andrés is a specialist in international agricultural development and animal science for both animal health and food safety. It's a pleasure to have you, Andrés, and we're very eager to learn about the launch of the beef and leather traceability tool that was launched, I believe, in Paraguay on Monday. So we get the second chance, so to say, to hear about this. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and to Fern, the organizers. Also, I see familiar faces, so I take the chance to say hello to Marta Angoloti. And yes, the system or the platform was actually launched yesterday, exactly 23 hours ago. And so this is the first day after that launch. This is a very important day for us because, as Marta was mentioning, systems vary according to the country, and VISIC in Argentina and Celo Verde in Brazil, or so in each country this has taken a different shape, rather done by the public sector, such as in Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and so on, or the private sector, such as VSEC, right? In any case, this varies a lot from country to country. So the EUDR has basically affected different countries on very different levels, depending, first of all, the commodity and on the country itself, meaning the development or strengthening of the country itself. So that has been a very interesting experience. I've been working in this for the last 5 years, actually, before EUDR came into practice. For Paraguay, it is basically livestock, soybeans, and timber. So this is important to define whenever we are talking about a country where, for instance, completely different to countries like Colombia, where coffee and cocoa is their main commodities being exported. So Paraguay is basically the fourth largest soybean exporter in the world, and then livestock, particularly beef, the 10th. So those are the most important commodities that supply the most amount of income for our country. We basically live on that. Paraguay is an agricultural country. Along with that, we export hydropower to Brazil and Argentina only. So two of the three main sources of income of Paraguay are under EUDR scrutiny right now. So I am part of the government, Ministry of Industry and Commerce, and our objective is, or our strategy is to try to industrialize Paraguay, right? See that is the path toward developing and enhancing our situation in general. So before we begin, I'd like to say that EUDR for us, we understand that what EUDR means with the Brussels effect, but and in the case of countries like Paraguay, EUDR means so much more than only the environmental sector and access to markets, specific markets. It means basically the formalization of the private sector and the strengthening of the public sector. This is very important for state development and rule of law. So I'll go to the first slide with that opening. I'll be pretty brief. So what you can see over there is basically that. So the mission of my ministry within my government is to access markets, right, and to create competitive, make Paraguayan products competitive in Paraguay and in other countries. So the reason why I selected the US, the UK, the EU was because before the current political situation, even in the US, there was a Forest Act, right? UK, we have the Environmental Act and EUDR, of course, right? So what we're doing over here is basically we are connecting the dots between different institutions. So that's a strategic long-term response line, Paraguayan institutions to comply with EUDR. Another important thing is this unified sovereignty, as we call it. So we have these different institutions, as you can read there, MIC, Infona, and so on. So these are basically the timber, environmental, livestock, and leather institutions that verify national compliance. Historically, Paraguayan government agencies have operated as isolated compartments, and this is typical for countries in developing countries like Paraguay, right? So what EUDR has triggered or catalyzed is this shift toward the inter-institutional governance that integrates our collective data systems. So this is almost a small revolution within the public sector, right? Because before each was doing their own thing, and now we are collaborating. This is a very long path because we have to create those connections and then make that happen in reality through connecting data. So on the market access, right? That's our main focus. Next slide, please. So this next slide, name is the digitalization of data and data interoperability. Sorry. So this has everything to do with what I was explaining. This has obligated us to, in the public sector, to go from paper to digital, right? Using satellite imagery, which is given in so many other countries, but in countries like Paraguay, we had to adapt our legislation to comply. For instance, with someone mentioned, I think it was Olivier, FAO definition of forests, right? So that differed before with the national definition of what a forest is, which is sort of the first condition for EUDR to be included. So that is a major public policy change that we had to implement within our national definitions. And also there's, as you can see, the polygonal data, plots of land, rights verification. We unfortunately do not have a cadastre, like a national cadastre, such as in Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, so many other countries, not to mention Europe and others. So this lack of having a cadastre made us impossible to work with that, or to just copy paste the solutions of Brazil or Argentina, right? Which are our neighbors. And it would have been the easiest thing to just copy paste their solution and do it here, but we don't have it. So we had to create this new registers through RETSA that is done now, that is being done now by the producers themselves, right? We're using WISP from the FAO for the forest, and it was funny that Olivier was also mentioning silver bullet providers or panacea. We also get those at least 2 a day, and there's no silver bullet over here. We are doing now things that have been done by many of your great grandfathers in Europe. Comparing with Japan, we're maybe in that aspect in 1860. So that creation of state was triggered by the EUDR. Finally, moving to my last slide, please. And I'm closing here. So as you can see here, this little map where we have the producers on the left side, the small producers or middle large, basically work with what we are trying is to create this holistic compliance, right? Labor, human, indigenous communities, environmental. This is a work in progress, right? This still hasn't been completed. This is a long way of integrating all the national institutions. We have 18, and we are starting now to connect the institutions. From 18, we have now 4, and we need so much more, right? So we need time, but it is a process that has begun. So where you see that little RETSA, Socio-Environmental Traceability, and the verifiable traceability, the mapping, labor rights, indigenous rights, that is all a work in progress right now. So some of these things are being covered right now by a sworn declaration, because we're in the indigenous communities, institutions, we don't even have computers, right? So we need to create all of that. We are also working with Alinvest Verde from the European Union. We're basically moving on cooperation funding, and our final objective is to create what we didn't have before. So to finish, and I'm finishing with this and closing with it, is that this formalization of the private sector, strengthening of the public sector, will mean one very important things. I'll talk about these 3 value chains in livestock. That has moved group traceability to individual traceability. We have a law now that mandates individual traceability for each cattle. That means that beef and leather will have the possibility of getting that social environmental traceability on top of the individual traceability. So we need to create the traceability first that we did not have. In soybeans, it's even worse. We didn't have traceability at all, nothing, right? And it's our first source of income. But we are now creating what we had in livestock in 1960, now in 2026, right? So that's old EUDR. And then in timber, we are moving from an incomplete traceability to having a somewhat manageable traceability, because that works in layers. First, you need traceability, and then you can put on top of that the social and environmental traceability, right? That's in a nutshell what we've done, and that's it. Thank you very much for your time. This is a screen capture of the actual initial website where one can get into the RETA system. As you can see down there, Senaxa Digital. That's a connection with it with the Livestock Institute, and that was my last slide. Thank you very much for the time, and sorry if I stepped the limit.
Thank you, Andrés. It was great to hear about the launch that happened yesterday, and congratulations on a successful launch. It's very impressive how many producers could get registered in a relatively short time frame, and it's great that 8 months ahead of implementation, this is ready now and can gear up towards implementation. We heard how important those sectors are for Paraguay's economy and competitiveness, and especially around leather. This tool will be very important. There's a lot of discussion in the Brussels bubble around this issue. Markets are usually separated. No, I know more about Brazil. A lot of beef is consumed within Brazil, but a lot of leather goes to the EU, and markets have been looking for traceability for a long time, and here might be a stellar example on how to provide it. So thank you very much, and we're looking forward to hearing more about it, how it does in the testing phase. There is quite an active chat, and I see our panelists have started to respond, which is great. I will also say at this point that yes, the presentations will be made available afterwards, and Michaela's report is already online. We will share a 2-page summary with the thank you message after this webinar, so you will get all the materials. And those who have asked for newsletters, I think all institutions represented here have newsletters that you can subscribe to, including our own Forest Watch, to stay up to date with EU policy. But who better than to explain and give the news about EU policy than our last speaker, Antoine? Let me briefly introduce you. So our final speaker today is Antoine Haouchine, International Policy Officer at the Directorate General for the Environment and the Directorate of Green Diplomacy and Multilateralism at the European Commission. Since 2022, Antoine has been actively involved in the negotiations of this file, the EU Deforestation Regulation, under the French presidency of the Council, and then from the European Commission in the trilateral negotiations. Antoine will give us an update on the timeline of the preparations for the EUDR, including the IT system. There was a dedicated question to that already in the chat, and also share what the Commission and joint member states initiatives offer in terms of partnerships with third countries. So we still have 244 participants, and I think this is largely because you're the last speaker. So we are waiting whether there's any updates from you that we haven't heard elsewhere. Antoine, over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. First, quick check. Do you hear me well? Yes.
Yes.
Now, thank you very much for the invitation. Very happy to provide you today with an overview of what is being done from the Commission side and also the next steps. I'll start by saying that the work follows what has been requested at the end of last year and by the legal text for the Commission to provide with the simplification review. This was a demand from the European Parliament and the Council. So firstly, I would also emphasize that the focus today is on all are on efforts to facilitate implementation, to offer clarification, with the view of ensuring a smooth entry into application by the end of this year. So on the next slide, I first give you a quick summary on what the review entails. FAQ and guidance, you are maybe well aware of those tools today. They will be further developed based on the stakeholders' feedback we've gathered and within the boundaries of the existing legislation. Then we will also propose a new delegated act on the scope of the regulation that will incorporate simplification that were put on the table last year, and also other targeted changes to the scope. I will dive a bit more into the process. New implementing act on the information system to basically align with the revised text of last year and to accommodate the simplified regime for micro and small primary operators, among other changes. I will also speak a bit more about that. All these measures outlined in the so-called April simplification report. That's a report from the Commission to the European Parliament and the Council. I will explain a bit more. So happy to give you an update and also explain a bit more how the work is going. So maybe on the next slide, please. FAQ first. Again, within the boundaries of the law, the idea is to focus on clarity and flexibility and to highlight the last concrete elements that are still that still require clarification based on feedback we received on December last year and January. We are planning this new iteration that aim at addressing the most relevant topic for stakeholders, notably around two major topics: the downstream supply chains and the role of micro and small primary operators. In addition to those two kind of group of question clarification, will provide elements on topics of e-commerce, but also on substantiated concerns and verification duties for non-SME downstream operators and non-SME traders. So in parallel, we are also working on updating the existing FAQ to align again with the latest amendment from last year. On the next slide, a word on the guidance document that also here provides flexibility whenever possible, in line again with what we received in December and January. We received a lot of position papers and proposal. One of them was focusing on the legality criteria under Article 3B. So this remains one of the most frequent requests and requests for clarification that we received. This guidance document will address this topic and also dive a bit more into descriptive guidance on due diligence in general and on this legality criterion in particular, with a balanced way that has been found between the objective of the text, the need for effective enforcement, and the pragmatic and proportional approach. The delegated act, another important element, as said, it incorporates the simplification that were put on the table last year, referring, for instance, the samples or very small product coming from Europe, coming to Europe for testing, for instance, or second-handed product. All these were discussed second half of last year and will be incorporated together with other targeted changes. This is a draft. Why? Because this will be subject to 4 weeks public feedback that we will use also to gather views and propose changes. So again, 4-week public feedback will start when the package will be published at the end of April, and you will have the opportunity to provide comments and feedback on this draft. On the next slide, we are also focusing on another aspect, which is more the communicative side, the communication with the update of the website and then a number of communication documents to be published. One of them has been released soon, which is the supply chain visual. Interesting element as well, more from the communication angle to explain more simply the rules of the regulation. A revamp of the website is also foreseen with a number of material documents, all of this being published by the end of this month. The report as well, it will come together, all these measures will come together with the report. The report will provide an overview of the main topic that were raised during the feedback period. It will also summarize the simplification measures that has been or will be implemented under the regulation, but also all the new simplification elements that were introduced as part of this exercise. Another feature is also the quantitative impact of both the previous and the new simplification package. So basically, it will be a summary of all that has been done and will be done. Now, finally, the last but certainly not the least work stream is the IT system. So a new implementing act on the information system is needed and will allow to revise the act according to the new text and the new law, in particular for the simplified regime for micro and small primary operators. So you are probably aware, but the availability of the information system changed in 16th of February to accelerate the development of the new features and migration of existing data. So our colleagues are working actively on it to integrate the new features stemming from the revised EUDR. The exact reopening date of the IT system will be soon communicated. I cannot for the moment give a specific date, but soon and most probably in the next 2 weeks, you will hear more about that. And just entering a bit more into details about the development, it's related to the introduction of new roles and features, submission form for the micro and small primary operators or their authorized representative, also new features to verify the validity of the reference number, and another demand from stakeholders how to group several due diligence number. So all this will be part of the revamped version of the IT system. On the next slide, a word also on what is being done beyond April. We are continuing the global cooperation as part of the Team Europe Initiative on Deforestation-Free Value Chain, this joint EU member states program that was launched at COP28 to support partner countries in transitioning to deforestation-free value chain by helping smallholders and producer countries also to comply with EUDR. The Team Europe initiative is implemented through major program, Safe Technical Facility TI Hub. This has been also a bit discussed during this webinar today, and complemented by regional initiatives. As presented earlier during the discussion, many projects already delivered on the ground, Africa, Asia, Latin America, with improvement on traceability supply chains, geolocation system, or in strengthening national data and certification framework. So the work continues also with member states, closely involved, of course, with a couple of discussion and informal technical exchanges. And this will be in the next 6 months, one of our key stream of work, working with member states and continual on more technical work. Information system has been mentioned, but also other support elements. I maybe stop there, but happy to have questions and to continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Antoine, I'm not quite sure. Did I hear a specific date of the release of the documents or not?
Not a specific date, but okay, for sure at the end of April before May. So you have 2 weeks ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. So yeah, with that, we're perfectly on time to move into the discussion, and thank for the panelists for having answered quite a lot of questions already in writing. We'll now look towards questions that are still open and questions we can explore together. Especially there were questions around Africa and cocoa farmers, and yeah, about unintended consequences. But before we go to those, I'm mindful that Olivier might have to board soon or is already boarding. So I also wanted to give him the chance to address a question. So my first questions go to Olivier and Andrés. And I want to, thank you for the rich presentations we've heard from you, but also from the other panelists. And we hear that a lot of strides are being made in many countries across sectors, across continents, across supply chains. And I was wondering, what are your takeaways? What can you learn from other sectors? You respectively in coffee, beef, soya. What can you learn from other countries and other sectors from what you've heard for your priority commodities? Is there anything that struck you as being particularly relevant that you might look at next for your own sectors? And maybe starting with Olivier, if he's still around.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. As predicted, my flight is being delayed, so I still have a few minutes.
Good for us.
Yes. I will say that on the one hand, there are certainly things that we can learn from different sectors when I look at this from the perspective of coffee. But not everything is that easy to implement, because it's not that they have found a silver bullet that we haven't come across. It's more that there's an underlying structure of the sector that allows another commodity, for example, to find a solution. If I think about cocoa, they tend to have a bit of a better pre-competitive landscape where discussion forums will allow them to come up with quickly with an agreement within the sector on how to treat, for example, the uncertainty on the legality assessment. This is one example that comes to mind, but not easily replicable. And then when it comes to other commodities like palm, they've invested because they had issues with deforestation way before. And so their origins are not necessarily the same as the coffee origins. So it's difficult. It's never one-to-one. It's messy. And we have to take each example one by one and try to see whether that can work. For sure, we are learning within LDC because we have 3 commodities impacted by EUDR, but it's not as it's not as simple as it seems to copy paste and then implement in different commodities.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I hope that the recently launched community of practice, the multi-stakeholder one, which was launched yesterday, will help address that and maybe also can facilitate this cross-learning from the sectors. I think looking at the differences you said in pre-competitive space would be very interesting to look at this a bit more in detail another time. Andrés, is there anything you think could be learned or replicated from other sectors?
Sure, everything, basically. So as I said, different countries have different levels of advancement towards traceability and regulations and control. So the good thing is we do not have to reinvent the wheel, as we say in Spanish, right? So most of the things have already been done for different purposes, tax purposes mostly, and in other countries and other centuries. So, of course, it is very enriching to interact with other countries, know what they are doing. We, for instance, are working very closely on soybeans with Argentina because they're we have the main way Paraguay interacts with the world trade is the river, right? So because we're landlocked and pretty much everything goes through Argentina. So naturally it seemed to us a very strategic partner. So we are working together with people from BISEC to develop our soybean system. And there's still a long way to go there. And all the collaborations that we get from EFI, for instance, also, they are here in Paraguay today. That's a shout out for Michaela Foster. And we have Javier Ortiz and others that are working on the legality framework with the EFI methodology. That has also been a milestone for us because up until the 2000s, our way of being competitive in Paraguay was just to basically publish legislation to comply with demands of different markets. And the EUDR turned the tables around when they asked, how do we comply with our national legislation, right? And then the question came back to us, what is our national legislation? And we looked into this mess of legislation, sometimes contradictory. This also happened in many other countries where you have more than hundreds and hundreds of different laws that sometimes contradict each other. So we're working on that right now, and that is a huge takeaway, organizing our own legislation and to know what it means to be compliant with it. And there's so much to talk and so little time, but those are the main takeaways I would like to answer so far. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very insightful and great that these go in parallel to the repository that Antoine has mentioned that maybe serve as also as a tool for those implementing the EUDR. I'd like to come to Michaela, and maybe you can help us address also the question in the chat about the misinformation in West Africa and cocoa sector. Is this what you experience as well, or through the study and your engagement? How can actors help share more timely and better information about what the EUDR really requires and how it affects smallholders and how they can get support? Is there any advice you have?
Yeah, definitely. So, communicating about the EUDR and getting that information all the way through the supply chain, all the way down to producers has certainly been a challenge. But like I mentioned in my presentation, CSO, civil society, are playing a big role in communicating that information. It's a very sensitive issue because there are a lot of concerns about smallholder exclusion. But at the same time, I feel like all of the efforts towards farmer registries, farm mapping, traceability, having a bit more visibility on that segment of the supply chain is creating a really practical entry point for additional support. So understanding where some of the challenges and additional needs are and where to direct support. And on that point, I think there's a big role for national systems there to support participation by all sector actors. And I'm quite happy to hear from Antoine that there's additional guidance coming, especially operational guidance and clarity, because that's one of the biggest asks that we received, not only sort of what is the EUDR, but how does one actually comply with it? What does due diligence actually look like? How will national systems and information be taken into account? So that sort of guidance, that practical guidance is really needed. In addition, I think on the sort of producer country side, transparency on their systems and information, sort of what information can they provide is needed, as well as this information on how that or guidance on how that information can actually be used in due diligence processes helps to build confidence in those systems. It reinforces the use of those systems and reduces uncertainty for operators. In terms of additional information and support, there are a number of different support programs, both in the work that we do at EFI, including through the Technical Facility for Deforestation-Free Value Chains, the SAFE program, as well as some of the other programs under the and projects under the TEI that are engaged in supporting actors in producer countries, both government institutions, but also all the way down to the farm level to be sure that it's very clear on what needs to be done and identifying who can do different aspects.
That's great. Thanks so much. And I wonder, Antoine, whether you would have anything to add on this. There was a question whether you can go a bit more into what will be clarified re legality, but if this cannot be done now, I would like to ask you whether you could answer the question of what happens procedurally. So the delegated act will be published. There will be feedback, but then what happens with the feedback? What's happening next? If you can walk us through that step as well. But maybe first, if you can share something more on legality, and then on the practical next steps this will take after the consultation.
No, sure, definitely. Thank you for the question on legality, and this will be part of the guidance document. The idea will be to clarify or give further inputs to the extent and the depth of the information that will need to be collected on the specific supply chain. Also, in-depth collection to be prioritized when the risk is higher, for instance. By contrast, when for areas where the risk of non-compliance is negligible, operators will be required to carry out an in-depth data collection, but this also will be further specified, and this also will depend specifically on the supply chain. But I cannot go too much into detail, but the idea would be to go a bit more in depth with this, in particular this legal requirement. On the procedure, the process, I would say that indeed 4 weeks feedback that we expect to gather a lot of opinion feedbacks and yeah, basically material for us to use this and to very quickly after that propose this delegated act to be voted by the EU legislator. This might not be too long, I must say. Difficult as well to predict. If you take the 4 weeks feedback in April, bring us to June. And then if it giving enough time for the ones concerned to adapt, I would say yes. Why? Because this aims at going in, not in depth, but to have targeted changes. But on that, I will not being able to go further into detail.
Yes, thanks. But there is so to say, a loop. There is the act. There's 4 weeks of feedback. You might take on board the feedback, and then it goes to the vote.
Absolutely.
Great. So we're very looking forward to seeing the documents come out soon. Yeah, a question also to Marta and to anybody else who would like to answer that. I think, Marta, you also have a bird-eyes view of countries. You've mentioned a lot of countries in Latin America, also might see a lot in European countries, but also companies preparing for the EUDR. What do you see as necessary steps now from April between December, and which actors do you think have a particular role to play now in this window until implementation?
Well, obviously, once we have the April packages published from our side, from the administration, we need to make an extra effort to explain all that will go out from the Commission side. As said, we have been working together with them with these documents, but now we need to explain all the operators what do they mean. So right now we have had a couple of months where we haven't been quite requested for webinars and so on, but I understand that after the release we will need to be quite active with the operators to really understand all these changes, because after the revision in December, obviously there has been many changes, and we need to be to make a swift explanation on them to make them prepare before December of these changes. And obviously the second actors are the companies that they need to adapt. And I know that the Commission is doing quite a huge effort, because the timing is really against them, and from the producing country, from the competent authorities, we will try to help them to get all this information in line as soon as possible.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, being active, proactive, reaching out, explaining what is happening is very important. You mentioned companies. Olivier, is there one last thing you would like to mention of what you're expecting once the documents are published?
Clarity, clarity, clarity.
All right, great. We are soon coming to an end of this session, so I'd like to give the floor again to our panelists and see what would be, yeah, your one takeaway from this discussion, or your one recommendation of what should happen next, or the one action you are going to take. So either action, recommendation, or takeaway. Starting with Michaela.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nicole. So maybe one sort of takeaway. One, I'm really impressed by all of the sort of work that's happened globally in support of deforestation-free supply chains, and EUDR is really sort of building that momentum and reinforcing those efforts. A lot of the focus has been on the more technical aspects, ensuring that like information systems are available and deployed. But I want to just flag that, sustainable supply chains aren't just sort of made by having information alone, and that continued efforts are needed both on legality reforms, on supporting tenure security, building capacity with producers and other local actors. Those will be really essential to ensure that all of the investments that have been made so far, both on the technical side as well as in some of the dialogues, that those really contribute to long-term sustainability.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Andrés, any final reflections from your side?
Sure. So I'd like to elaborate a little bit more about what Olivier mentioned. Communication. Of course, this is super important for us since we do not have this direct link to Brussels or sometimes some competent authorities. We are now, in the case of Paraguay and so many other countries, starting to do more and more dry runs. So this is our way of checking out how things work, what we have, this minimum viable products that we have created so far, given the time given, even though UDR has been postponed. There's never enough time, right? So, but anyways, this communication with competent authorities such as Ms. Angoloti, and definitely also Mr. Haouchine would be crucial for initiatives, be it government initiatives or private initiatives, to comply with UDR. Right? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, there's one issue in the chat that has been raised. What about timber? We haven't spoken a lot about timber, but maybe Marta, you have worked on the EUDR as well. Any learnings maybe from that process that you can give us a recommendation for the EUDR? I feel the EUDR is a bit taken also as then as a silver bullet, also that it can solve all issues. I mean, how timber is competitive or not, which timber products are, does not always or not only have to do with the EUDR and the EUDR. This is a wider market questions, whether pellets or good timber on the use of forests. It's a big issue, and I don't think we can clarify that all. But in actions to be taken or recommendations or learning from other sectors, also from timber, what would be your final word, Marta?
Thank you, Nicole. Well, as you are well aware, EUDR hasn't been perfect because obviously each law has its loopholes. Every time you legislate, you could miss something. But I think that from EUDR we have learned a lot. We have tried to correct the mistakes made on the EUDR for EUDR. So the first lesson is that we have learned from UTR mistakes when preparing for EUDR. And I would like also to point that when we started with UTR, the timber sector was so discouraged also because it seems impossible to have a due diligence system from many countries. And they did it. Many companies did they did their work. They have due diligence and they have been able to import the timber. So anything happens, the commerce continue to flow. And well, I guess that they can. Many companies from the timber sector could share all their learnings, and I think that the positive of that experience could be also shared in all the commodities. As I said at the very beginning, they were also quite puzzled of what a due diligence was and everything. And many companies, they completely, well, now they know how to work on that. So I think we can see that from the EUDR side, to see that things can be changed.
Yes, thanks for giving us hope that even if it looks daunting in the beginning, solutions can be found. Communication, cross-learning will be necessary, tight coordination with actors across the supply chain. Also, Olivier, any final word from your side? The plane might have left. So, Antoine, the final word goes to you.
Thank you. I think I would say that first, EUDR is already a reality on the ground. This has been, it's clear. A lot has been happening globally. But the work doesn't stop there, indeed. And I think Olivier, before leaving, said clarity, clarity, clarity. So I understand clarity is still needed, of course. This is what we at the European Commission, but also all together, are trying to achieve toward April, by the end of this year, but also beyond. And also going as practical as possible, as detailed as possible. I'm referring here to the FAQ. And final word, it's that we are doing this collectively, member states, company, but on a daily basis, we are discussing with all stakeholders to try to going as precise as possible and to have this regulation a reality for all on the ground, for everyone, and in the for achieving the environmental objective, which is also the basic of all of this.
Yes, thank you so much. We're very looking forward on the next steps. So we will hit a refresh on the Commission website every day now, I think. So yeah, thanks to all our panelists for sharing your insights, your updates, your recommendations, your hopes, your learnings. It's been very insightful, and I hope we can do a deep dive again in the second half of the year when we have a bit more clarity. And this reminds me of one of my NGO colleagues said on campaigns, on advocacy. It's only when we can almost not hear the message anymore, when we have thought everybody has understood it, that the message actually gets through. And that might be the same for the EU Deforestation Regulation. It's a complex and all-encompassing regulation, and even if there are a lot of talks and webinars, it needs more communication, more reaching out probably than anticipated. And so it's great to be able to connect to you and have these rounds of discussions. So thanks a lot, and thanks also to my colleagues in the background, notably Tiziano, to making this webinar go smooth and possible. And we hope to be in contact with many of you in the next few weeks to come. Thank you so much.